Hello guys, welcome to my short tutorial about how to use Ajax in Vue.js application. In this tutorial, we will also cover how to use Ajax inside Vuex, so basic understanding of state management and the Vuex would be helpful. Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. We use Ajax when we want our client application to communicate with the server by getting or sending data through an HTTP request. This action is asynchronous, which means it doesn't block page rendering and doesn't block other parts of the script. It is very important for user experience because you don't force users to reload the page in order to get new data. You can just update parts of the page without refreshing the page. All single-page application frameworks are generally used for making dynamic web apps that rely on data that comes from the server. So understanding Ajax is prerequisite for learning any of the modern front-end frameworks. Let's start by creating a Vue.js application using Vue CLI. I will switch to a folder where I want to create a new Vue.js app. You can check if you have Vue CLI installed by running vue-version. If it's installed, you should see Vue CLI version. In case you don't have Vue CLI installed, you can install it by running npm install globally. After that, just run command vue create and add the name of your project. I will call mine Vue Ajax tutorial. Now we are available to pick a preset. I will choose option manually select features because I want to include Vuex into the project. So, let's wait until the project setup is done. Now, when the project setup is done, I will switch to a project folder and run npm run serve to start application on my local server. Now we can open a browser and see how our application looks like. I will open a project in my development environment. I'm using Visual Studio Code, but you can use whatever development environment you prefer. Create a separate file where you want to place an Ajax method. I want to start by creating async await method for Ajax call. Later, I will show you an example with using promise. I will give a name to a method HTTP, and this method will have three parameters: URL, method with get as a default value, and data that we want to send to a server. I want to store the response from the server in a variable called response. Await function will stop the execution of the script until the asynchronous call is finished. We will pass parameters to fetch method. Fetch methods returns promise with the response object, so in order to extract JSON from the response, we will need to call JSON method with await keyword and the function will return the JSON data. Don't forget to put async and await keyword in front of the functions. You can also wrap your code in a try-catch block if you want to handle errors. For this simple example, we can just console log the error. So, by adding async keyword, we are making the function that will return a promise. In this example, fetch function will return resolved promise with the value of the JSON data. Await keyword will make the execution of the code stops. In this example, we have sent request for data, but waiting for the response. Another example of making asynchronous function is by using promise. Async await function is actually built on top of promise. Promise is an object that can create value in the future. I will use the same code for making HTTP function with promise. Our HTTP function will return a promise object. Inside the promise object, we have two methods as parameters, resolve and reject. Resolve will return value with a promise state fulfilled. Reject will return a value with a promise state reject. In case of fulfilled state, then callback function will be triggered. Reject state will trigger catch callback function. Call the fetch method and get JSON data from the response. Pass parameters to fetch method the same way as in the previous example. The function inside then callback will be called after a fetch promise is fulfilled. Now we get the response object from the server, but we need to call JSON method, which is also asynchronous. So we will add another then function. Now we can add JSON data as a parameter to a resolve method. In case of a server error response, the function in the catch callback will be called. We can also add console log in case of an error response. And don't forget to export your function if you want to use it in other JS files. I will remove unnecessary blocks of code in this component. Let's add the data option to component with posts value, where we are going to store data from the server. For now, it will be just an empty array. Let's also add a mounted method, since we are going to call the server when the component is mounted. I would like to test this before making an Ajax call here. Okay, everything works fine. Component is mounted. I will import HTTP function that we built. Now, inside mounted method, I would like to call HTTP function. I will use JSON placeholder fake online API, but you can use whatever API you like. You can check their documentation and see what are the endpoints that you can call. I will call getPosts endpoint. So I will pass URL parameter to HTTP method. The method is get by default, and I don't send any data to the server, so we just have URL parameter. Create a variable called data and add async await keywords. Now you can console log the data that we get from the server, just to see if everything works fine. In our browser console, we are available to see the array of posts. Let's display posts on a web page. We need to make a template to render posts data. I will create a list item and use v-for directive to iterate through the posts. Assign server data to the posts stored in the data option. Don't forget to use a key for v-for directive. we will display the post title inside the list item for each post. Now we can see posts on a web page. I will show you another example without async await functions. You can use promise with then callback. It's absolutely the same. You can choose whatever you like, but be consistent when you're writing your asynchronous code. In a then callback, assign data from the promise to post data. Now let's see our web page to make sure everything is the same. Let's make an example using the post method. We will create an HTML form so the user can enter the data that we will send to the server. In this simple form, the user can create a new post with title value. Create an input field with a type text and the button with a type submit. Add the new post object to the data option with a title value of the empty string. Bind title value to the input field so it updates automatically when the user enters some value. We want to catch the submit event, so we will add a submit directive and the method that we want to trigger when the user submits the form. Add a prevent modifier to prevent default form submitting. Let's create onFormSubmit method. For now, we will just console log the value after the user submits the form. Let's see how it works in the browser. I will write a title for the new post and I will submit the form. Okay, it works fine. Now inside the onFormSubmit method, we can call HTTP function and pass the URL for post method. We also need to add a data parameter that we will send to the server. That will be the new post object. Inside then callback, we will add some code to make sure that request was successfully made. It works fine, but as you see, it takes some time until we get a response from the server. I will add a loading label to indicate to user that something is going on in the background. Set loading value to false. Before making Ajax call, set loading to true, and in finally callback, set loading to false to reset the default value. Finally is a callback function that will be triggered regardless of the promise outcome. Now let's add loading to the template and test in the browser. I will use vif directive to display this paragraph only if the loading value is true. It works fine, but it's a good practice to display a message to a user if something went wrong with making a call to the server. In other words, you should handle an error case. I will use a JavaScript alert method for this simple example, but you can use some other notification for that. If an error occurred, the function in the catch callback will be triggered, so I will add a catch callback. Instead of the correct URL, I will pass the wrong URL as an argument. After handling error, let's append our newly created post to the list of posts, so we can see the title that we entered in the input field. The title of the new post is at the end of the list. We can add a new post at the beginning of the list with the unshift method. That would be all for part 1 of the tutorial. We covered some basics about how you can use Ajax to get and post data to the server in Vue.js. You can try on your own with different APIs and add more complexity. In part 2, I will show you how to use Ajax with Vuex. I put a link of part 2 in the video description. If you like this video, subscribe to my channel.